In the United States today, expressions of Islamophobia and incidents of racial profiling and anti-Muslim hate crimes actually exceed that which was experienced immediately after 9/11. So against this backdrop, how do you understand your responsibility as an artist? And do you consider your art to be a form of activism?
Phenomenal question. So let's unpack that. There's two sides to it. The first part of the question, I think, has to do with Islamophobia and having a responsibility as an artist. Do I feel any, or do I have any responsibility as an artist? Again, as a Muslim American artist, to even talk about that or be involved in that. And the second question was, the last part of the question was about art and activism.
Art and activism.
So I'll answer the second part first because that's easy for me. One of my great inspirations as a comic is the great African American living legend, Dick Gregory. Those who are fans of stand-up know who Dick Gregory is. For those who don't know who Dick Gregory is widely considered the first African American performer to perform for white audiences flat-footed. What that means is, before him, if you wanted to talk to a room full of white people, you had to shuck and jive and dance. You could not be flat-footed and just talk as a human being. So Dick Gregory is, like the man. I got a chance to meet him a couple times, and I got to interview him actually one time. And I asked him this exact question, because those who don't know, the second part of his life is he becomes a great comic, then he quits stand-up, and he just devotes himself to the civil rights movement. In fact, there's a little-known piece of American history where he quit his comedy career just kind of midstream, and he had a bunch of dates booked for the rest of the year. These are big, like, theater dates, and he's like, I'm not doing it. I'm just focused on the movement. His manager called Bill Cosby's manager, current situation notwithstanding, and asked Cosby if he'd cover the dates. Cosby went and did those shows and sent the check to Dick Gregory's house. So this is a hidden sort of history of commingling of art and activism. So I asked Mr. Gregory, what do you think about using my art, my comedy as an activist platform? And he said, look, he said, ain't no artist ever changed the world. He said, ain't no artist ever changed the world. He said, when you're on stage, your job is to be funny. And real life happens off the stage. And don't get it twisted. You're not changing the world by telling funny jokes. You want to make real change, you have to be, if you want to be an activist, you got to be in it. You got to march, you got to write, you got to speak, you got to do all that community organizing. So that was really inspirational for me. I said, okay, well, do you have any advice for me? And I can answer the first part of the question with his advice. I said, do you have any advice for me? I'm a Muslim, I look like this, I'm living in America, I do comedy. Do you have any advice? What should I do with my act, or how should I take my comedy? And he said, oh, that's easy. He said, just get on stage every night and tell the truth. It just hit me like a lightning bolt, I'm not gonna lie. And I was like, wow, I've been processing that for the last 10 years. But I think that is what great art is to be able to really be fearlessly truthful. And one of my mentors is Dave Chappelle. He quoted me this line recently, and he said, politicians lie to hide the truth. Politicians lie to hide the truth, and artists lie to tell the truth.
Thank you so much.
So my background, I worked for many years as a civil rights attorney, working on very unpopular legal issues. So I worked with prisoners in California, I've worked with sex offenders, I worked with suspected terrorists, and so kind of the hot button topics. And the thing that struck me in my civil rights background that actually led to the creation of Love Inshallah was the power of the story and power of storytelling. But it also, when you're telling the stories of people, you can't sanitize. So what Azhar was saying, you have to tell the truth. You can't sanitize things. And I look at sort of the culture in the U.S., anti-Muslim hate, bigotry. I think what that's done for a lot of people in the Muslim community is really caused them to hold back. And I've noticed this, that people sort of want to become very defensive, and they want to present Islam in a certain light. And so, you know, I see the work that I do as uplifting a narrative and amplifying the voices of Muslim women, because people will say Muslim women you know, aren't speaking for themselves, but the truth is Muslim women are speaking. It's that people are not listening. And so it's about creating these platforms to amplify these voices, but at the same time recognizing that sometimes our words can be taken and used against us. So, you know, even with the creation of Love Inshallah, there was a lot of hesitancy by a lot of the women. They said, well, what if I tell an unfavorable story and an unpopular story about an abusive relationship? Will this come back to hurt the community as a whole? And it's our job, I think, as artists, as writers, to tell the truth, speak the truth, regardless of how your words, unfortunately, can be used to sort of manipulate things, because we really want the truth coming out.
All right. Well, I think that the political aspect of it, like you're saying, it's kind of built into it. You're kind of forced to be an example of something. I mean, in general in society, but I think in terms of my personal work, I don't really, now at least, I think what really happened is before I was very in your face about being critical, not only just of the way that Muslims were treated in the West, but also of Islam itself and my old music and stuff. But what really changed everything for me is the war in Syria. I kind of internalized everything. So while I think that the identity and the political aspect is inherent in it, I don't know if I would necessarily say, other than providing like a positive way for people to express give an example for other people to express themselves in a similar way. Other than that, I don't think that I'd really necessarily see myself as being an activist anymore, at least, because the war just kind of crushed all my hope for everything. But in the end, I think it'll work out for the best.
For me, I was born and raised in London, England, and I was exposed to theatre from a young age, and I went to a high school that had a really strong theatre department. And it was in my drama class where I really sort of experienced the power of theatre, and then just seeing plays made me really realize that theatre and activism go hand in hand, and that they're a part of each other. And I was about 17 when I discovered that there was a writer inside me and a performer. We had immigrated to Chicago when I was 15, and I continued taking theater classes in my high school. And I was exposed to solo performance in high school in the US. And it was through my training in solo performance that I sort of found a voice for myself to tell my own story. And through my playwriting classes, where it really began, and I always knew, just from the plays that I had been exposed to, that theater was activism. When I wrote Unveiled, I'm not really sure what inspired it, other than a need to tell stories. Because I remember after 9/11, everybody had a story. And it wasn't just the Muslim community. It was also the Sikh community, the Hindu community, Latinos. Everybody had a story. And the writer part of me just kind of filed it away inside me, somewhere inside me. And so when I started writing the play, the voices, the stories that I collected, and then my own imagination as a dramatist, it all came out, and I wrote the play. The one thing that, if you look at hate crime, the one thing that has to be present for a hate crime to happen is two things, actually: negative stereotypes and degrading language. And if those two things are left unchallenged, you create an atmosphere where a hate crime can happen. So it never begins with the gun, the knife, the bat. It begins with an atmosphere of degrading language and negative stereotypes about a group of people. That's where it starts. So I felt that the only way to do some kind of activism with everything that's happening right now towards my community was to challenge negative stereotypes and to just put it on the table. And I was able to do that through Unveiled. When I wrote Unveiled and I performed it, it was really interesting to me to see the response from the audience, and it was really great and it was really powerful. And I just kept going, and I wrote 2 more plays after I wrote Unveiled. And for me, I just really believe it all, the art, the activism, it's intertwined, and it all goes hand in hand.
Thanks. I've never looked at myself as an activist. There are a number of organizations like CARE, ADC, MPAC, who do phenomenal activist work, and that's something that people dedicate their lives to 24/7 around the clock, sacrifice a ton of economic success for themselves to work for these kind of nonprofit organizations. For me, as an American Muslim or Muslim American, what do you want to call me, or somebody who's of the Muslim descent living in America post 9/11, I felt as a community we had done a really poor job in terms of expressing ourselves and sharing our stories with our fellow Americans. We were pretty isolated, kept together as a religious and social group, especially based on ethnicity. But growing up, I had always felt very much a part of the quote-unquote American fabric. I loved music, I played sports, I went to a school where I was I was just one of the guys, and always identified that way. So post September 11th, I really looked at how could I help tell a story and do a better job. And I've looked at myself more of being an educator than being an activist. And that was one of the reasons I created Fortson, was because the kids in the movie, they embody America, they embody their culture and their religion. So much like they're Arab American Muslims, they're just very similar to, Irish Catholic Christians, except they happen to go to a mosque instead of a church. Their moms happen to wear hijab instead of, wear hijab. So I think for me that storytelling was important for us to connect and to tell our stories. And I also think, you could be a playwright, or you could be a musician, you could be an artist, but it's incumbent upon every Muslim to get out there and communicate and talk. So I have friends who are physicians, and that's what they do really well. So when Katrina hit, they were down in New Orleans offering medical services. I have friends who are dentists, and they've gone overseas to do dental work. I have friends who are teachers, and they've gone and created, teaching movements about Islam in the schools that they work in. My wife is a teacher by trade, and she went to the school where our kids go. Our kids go to a school, there's 500 kids and there's 6 Muslims, yet she was able to convince the school to bring Rohina in and perform in front of all 500 students. So that responsibility in terms of projecting who we are and bringing the truth out about American Muslims and kind of helping our fellow Americans learn about us, it's a responsibility of every Muslim in this country, not just artists or playwrights or movie makers. And that's kind of how I looked at my role in terms of making this film.